Second.
We're good.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back. Summer went fast. The date is Thursday, August 9th, 2018, and I call to order this special meeting and executive session of the Scottsdale Unified School District Governing Board. The time is 1:05, and we will start with a roll call from my far right.
Sandy Kravitz.
Allison Beckham.
Pam Kirby.
Barbara Perleberg, Board Member Hartman is traveling and away this meeting. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We'll go straight in, and I'll make a motion that the governing board adjourn in executive session for the following agenda items. 3A, pursuant to ARS 38431.03A1, discussion or consideration of employment of acting superintendent John Creekard. Dr. Creekard has been provided the notice required pursuant to this section. 3B, pursuant to ARS 38431.03A3 and 4, discussion or consultation with the governing board's attorney for legal advice and in order to consider its position and instruct its attorneys regarding employment of Dr. John Creekard. 3C, pursuant to ARS 38-431A3, discussion or consultation with governing board's attorney regarding governing board policy BDG, school attorney, general counsel position description, and general counsel evaluation instruments. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Board Member Kravitz. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, motion passes. We will adjourn in executive session. All righty. Welcome back, everyone. The time is 3:16, and we have reconvened our special meeting. We'll get right into our first information discussion item, 5A, discussion of potential interim superintendent or superintendent search firms pursuant to RFQ number 18035, interim superintendent search, and RFQ number 18035R, superintendent search. Discussion may include preference for which firm to hire as well as process for interim superintendent or superintendent search. So, Dr. Creekard, who will be leading this discussion specifically? Is that for Michelle? And did we maybe not? There we go. We jumped too soon. Michelle, we're ready to start our information discussion on the 5A, the interim search. Sorry. Jennifer,
Michelle, you had one.
It's right there.
I gave you one.
I apologize. Jumped the gun here. So eager.
Sorry about my tardiness. Madam President, members of the board, Dr. Creekard, and all. We have provided you with the opportunity to have discussion of the two RFQs that our purchasing department put out for one, the interim search firm services, and then the permanent search firm services. Those were RFQ numbers 18035 and for the interim, and then 18035R for permanent. Discussion may include preferences for which firm to hire as well as process for interim search and or permanent superintendent search. I provided you the background documents that I received from purchasing. You will see that we had a total of 4 bids for the interim search. When we went back out and asked firms to bid on the permanent search, one of those 4 firms chose not to bid, and the other 3 gave a new bid for the permanent search. I don't know if you've had an opportunity to read the documents. I can share some of the summary information. I'm not sure how you would like to proceed. If you have questions about purchasing, I'm hoping Mr. Gadd can help me a little bit. But I do have some basic information from purchasing about how they did the search.
Okay.
Any questions, or how would you like to start?
For the initial questions during the presentation, Board Member Beckham.
One of the questions that I had is, do you have a recommendation from the department of the individuals that referred? And if you don't have a recommendation, do you have an opinion on the differences between the 3?
I do not have a recommendation as to one firm over another. I think there's a lot of considerations. You have one that is in Arizona Arizona-based firm based out of Tucson, albeit, but an Arizona firm. The others are not local, if that matters to you. One of the vendors we have used in the past, that was the vendor that we used. Sorry?
Sorry, go ahead.
That is Hazard Young, that is the one that we used as a district that resulted in the selection of Gary Catalani as our superintendent a few years back. I am not familiar with the other firms. I only have the information that's in there about their experience and what other school districts that they've assisted. Jeff, did you have anything to add to that?
No. Let me talk to purchasing for just a moment. I think I was told that one of these firms recently conducted searches for 2 districts in the valley.
That is true.
Do you know, Michelle, which firm that is?
Let me check my notes here. Sorry.
I think it was Peoria and,
I think it was
There was one that had Phoenix Union,
McPherson.
Peoria.
Jacobson,
Was that
I
McPherson?
believe so.
It had the longest list of.
The one in Tucson
Districts,
had
correct?
Sunnyside in Tucson and then Kyrene up here in the Metro Phoenix area. And then it was McPherson, if that's correct.
McPherson had
They both had
Tucson,
them, too.
Kyrene, Sunnyside, as well as an innumerable amount of schools from Arkansas, California, Idaho, the list goes on and on. So it must be that, I don't know who did Peoria though.
I don't know.
But one of those questions was, both companies said they did Sunnyside
And Kyrene.
in 2015. So I was wondering
I
how
don't
that
know the
happened.
answer to why they both would have
Well,
that.
I had wondered that too.
Yeah, I
I'd
thought-
seen that both of them, I think, had done Sunnyside and Kyrene, and I was wondering why was there overlap? Did somebody hire, did one district hire somebody that, based on a search done by one of the firms and left early? I didn't have a chance to look at the
I don't know
side by
the answer
side.
to that. Certainly, we can follow up with the firms and ask that question.
So I have a question. So does purchasing do any vetting of the bids when they come in to ask questions, like some of the more obvious ones?
We provide the background information, which I think you have, that was furnished because of our questions in the RFQ. We have not pursued the background information. I think we were kind of waiting on the board to tell us, if you want us to pursue this on a very formal basis, what's your experience, et cetera, we can do that, if that's your desire.
Dr. Krieger, do you have a statement?
It might also be helpful if we would ask them if they use a local contact person, especially out-of-state firms, or even from Tucson, if there's a local and who that person is, because we might be able to provide the board with some information, whether that local person is somebody that we would want to work with or have knowledge of or be
We
able to
could even have
recommend.
a couple of the more likely ones come in and make a brief presentation to the board, especially the local ones if you're interested in doing that. There's a couple of firms that I've been used to in the past, they're not here. And like Ray and Associates is one that you see a lot of. They're not, I don't know why they're not here, but they're not, so.
Ray
you know.
Brent. We worked with them before. Is that Ray Brent, Barrett, Brent?
Well, it's
You
irrelevant. It
mean,
doesn't
they
matter.
just didn't
They
bid?
didn't
just didn't
bid.
They did not bid on
Yeah.
I mean,
Can I jump in?
I liked what McPherson and Jacobson, is that the right? That they sent us, I thought it was very thorough, and they did list all the contacts in Arizona and actually throughout the country. I thought their presentation, or the information they submitted was very comprehensive.
Board Member Beckham?
Can I follow up that with a question? And maybe Mr. Gadd can answer this since you've had experience with it. In the McPherson and Jacobson, it said that there were 2 current superintendents that actually would be part of the team that would be helping our district. And that kind of seems strange to me. And when I asked the question of Ms. Marshall, she said it's not unusual. But can you explain to how that works, that somebody who is full-time employed as a superintendent of a school district
Usually a retired.
could,
They're usually retired.
well, I checked that, and the Catalina Foothills superintendent that is on there is the current superintendent of Catalina Foothills School District. And then the gentleman that was mentioned, I went to the internet, and he is also.
What district?
They may have disclosed, though, that they're.
Right, but
So-
how do you do that? I am thinking our superintendent's time does not, it's a 24/7 job
Some-
practically. How would you have time to even
Some
do that and be
superintendents
paid?
do have consulting days built into their contract, if they've done some consulting.
And that's what that would be?
And that would be, so they have that, that's an understanding with their board, and built into their contract, they might have 10 consulting days in their contract for the year or something, and then they are able to do that with their board's permission.
So can I ask, have you ever done that so that we can get some, if you have, your experience in how that works, having an existing superintendent actually working for finding
I have
a
not worked as a consultant with them, but both in Paradise Valley and Deer Valley. I worked with the search company as the outgoing superintendent in the first case and as interim in the second case to help the board get through the paperwork and just facilitate it for the board, with the board making the final recommendation, right? Final vote, obviously. But I did facilitate and worked with different search firms.
So had you worked with any of these three?
No, I worked with Ray and Associates and Hughie Associates.
Board Member Kirby.
Okay, so I've been confused on this for some time now. So I see I understand that RFQ 18035 is interim and 18035R is permanent. And maybe I missed it, I only see one PDF of the proposal. And that ties to the permanent search. Is there a separate proposal that I missed for, let's just stay on this one, McPherson, for example. I see the permanent proposal, did I miss the interim proposal? Has anyone else, any other board members seen that? Or is it in here and I missed it?
I just saw the three.
I just saw.
I sent you everything I received from purchasing, so I'm not sure if the firms, because of the revision, just did the same
But
proposal.
didn't you say, you went back to say, what would be your bid to combine, to do both?
I didn't do it, but what it looks like to me.
That's a different
is-
question.
That's a different-
It's a question, but it's a different question.
Yeah. Is that purchasing put out the first bid, then put out a revised one for the so interim, and then put out the revised one for superintendent.
So
But
did
I
the-
don't know that
Did the second one
vendors,
result in just a single proposal then?
that's what it looks like to me.
So do we have proposals on interim?
We have a summary from purchasing of different price points for interim versus permanent search.
Okay.
So some of them have a slightly lower price for the interim
Okay.
search services.
So sticking with that line of logic then, in this one firm is an example. McPherson has a price point of $36,900 for permanent
Right?
and $33,200 for interim, per the summary given to us by purchasing.
Right.
The PDF, the proposal that I see in front of me ties to the permanent, which is the $36,900.
Okay.
Because they have a breakdown of their charges, and it ties to the $36,900. So the question is, are we missing a proposal for the interim?
Was that did you say no, Jim? Or
Probably
you're-
need to let me make a phone
Okay.
call as soon as we get some questions
Okay.
accumulated here. My suspicion is, that's why you see the prices so close together. There's almost an identical scope of work, whether it's interim or whether it's permanent. I mean, that's typically what you see with a lot of these. They do the same process, and so the prices are very similar to, and the scope of work is very similar to whichever one you pick. There's not a lot of difference.
But this $33,200 has got to tie to something.
Right.
Yeah.
And what is it tied to, and can we get that, please?
Okay.
And that's just not for McPherson, it's for all of them.
Right, okay.
And that leads into one of the questions I think was all just sort of highlighted here, and that's my question is, what is their price if they were to do both?
And I
Because
asked Eva to follow up with the vendors. I didn't hear back yet. Do you know if she, okay. I did have that question from more than one board member, and I asked purchasing to follow up on that with the vendors to find out, are you talking about just look at these numbers and add them together, or is there something you would do if they if the board chose to have you do both? We don't have that answer yet back.
Because, yeah, history has shown us that sometimes there's a much smaller amount if you do both for.
You would think.
Yeah.
I would think so, because the process is very similar.
Right.
I would think that there would be a substantial reduction if you did both rather than just.
So to come back to, and I'm going to lend my personal opinion on your comments that they are often very the same process. That may be, but in this case, I envisioned when we started down this path something different. And that is a permanent search process that is very much like what districts are used to, community meetings, multiple meetings, what are you looking for in your superintendent, high engagement. But on the interim, while I still saw community engagement, I saw it scaled down. And what I remember mentioning back in May was an option to, for the board to select maybe 3 finalists, and then have those 3 finalists presented to the community, not in 5 different meetings, but maybe 1 meeting. Maybe interact with the media on Q&A, as one of the East Valley School Districts recently did. I forget, Chandler or Gilbert, I can't remember. So you're still getting community involvement, but it's not that long, protracted process as the permanent. And so my question would be, without seeing what their services were, is that something the board would be interested in, that kind of a process, and what is the price point for that kind of a process? And would they be willing to do it?
I had
Board
one
Member
more
Beckham?
point, and that was and it looked like it was just pretty basic language that they put into all contracts, but I think that things have changed, and that is when they said we do a background criminal check, it's $125, we send it off to that third party. And one of the contracts said we do that only on the finalists. And another one said, well, if you want it to be done at some point before that. And so I would say, given our experience, we would want that more extensive Google background check as well as the criminal up front. We don't want to spend the money to
And the
have
time.
all of these people go through the process and then wait till they're a finalist and find out there's something wrong.
Right.
That's something we want up front, and we want it more extensive, so it might cost more. So we need to find out if they are willing to do that.
These are all questions we can ask of these firms and come back with the information that you desire.
Any additional questions? Comments?
Is it, so,
Board Member
I do,
Kirby?
so, for us to continue to move down this path on a timely basis, I would like, this board member would like those questions answered with clarity by Tuesday. Actually, even better by tomorrow, so we have the weekend to look at it. Some of it should be really, even if you can only give us a couple of the answers. I mean, I have to believe that there's proposals out there that these numbers came from. If we could get those tomorrow, that's the reading, that's the heavy lifting for us. The other answers aren't that, and those can wait because they're more short and sweet.
Well, a local contact should be easily
Local
determined.
contact.
And I think that's high on the list.
And I know she's working on it, she just didn't
Right.
have it all
Mhm.
ready, so I'll
Absolutely.
touch base with her and
Yeah.
I'll figure that out. And we will be bringing it back on Tuesday.
Yes. Okay. No additional comments or questions? All right, great, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll move on to our next information discussion, item 5B, AZ Merit 4-year trends. Presentation by Cynthia Bachna? Bachna, so close.
If I could introduce Dr. Bachna, since this is her first presentation to the board. She started July 1. If you remember, we were able to steal her away from Mesa Public Schools, where she did pretty much the same job, second in command of the assessment office, but a much larger district and a larger office, and we've been learning of her many skills, and hopefully we will all be able to answer the questions that you have from this presentation. So, Dr. Bachman.
Thank you. I apologize for my current state. Okay, so I'm here to present to you today about AZ Merit, talking about the Scottsdale students' mastery of the state standards over time. A little background, this test was first given in the spring of 2015 to grades 3 through 11. It measures English language arts, a combination of reading and writing, which was a change from Ames where you had a separate reading and writing score. With AZ Merit, you just have an overall ELA score. And then in math, it measures in grades 3 through 8 grade level math, and then at the high school level, it measures Algebra 1, Geometry, and Algebra 2. We have other measures of achievement here in Scottsdale. This is just one point of time that we have data on, but we also have our teacher grades, PSAT, AP, SAT scores, all those things listed up there, our school city benchmarks that we use throughout the grade levels, as well as end of course finals. So with that in mind, this is the data we got back in May from the testing company. So this is the first glance we had at the data back from the testing company. So how do Scottsdale students' percent passing, which is the levels of proficient and highly proficient, compare to those of Arizona? This is what's first released to us. What you can see up here is that in every grade level and subject area, Scottsdale students outperform the state averages in the different testing. If you look at 5th grade in particular, there's standouts in English language arts where nearly 3/4 of Scottsdale 5th graders pass the test. And also in 5th grade math, our scores are very strong. Throughout 3rd through 5th grades, our scores are very strong as well. 9th grade ELA and Algebra 1 are the top performers at the high school level, and you can see that listed up here.
Before you go on, do you have just SUSD total ELA, not by grade?
You want to talk to that?
So you're talking about what was in the paper this?
No.
No.
Well, maybe it was. I feel like we didn't get a total SUSD, we just jumped right into grades.
There really is no such thing statistically. We've had this conversation. You really have to look at each test individually. Tests change from year to year. The cut scores are different over time, and there isn't a real statistical way, and correct me if I'm wrong, Cindy, that you can just put it all together and say this is SUSD's ELA score or SUSD's math score. You have to look at each test individually.
You're looking at the
Same
different
is
grade
true
levels.
by school. You can't look at one school's grade when it covers, in the high school, 3 different grade levels, or at the 3 at the elementary school as well.
Yeah, you're actually.
So you said, so does that mean it doesn't exist?
It
Does
may
that mean-
exist, but it's not an accurate measure of.
Somebody may have put it together. We don't get it that way.
Okay, well, there's a lot of other people in Arizona putting together that overall. So what I'm hearing is that this administration disagrees with having an SUSD ELA score.
do.
Okay.
For usefulness of information, it's much more beneficial to look at each individual grade level and each individual test, because ultimately you're not giving one test, you're giving 3 through 11 ELA and 3 through Algebra 2 math. So on this slide, we're just looking at, the state versus Scottsdale trend for 2018 alone. On this next slide, we're actually looking at Scottsdale students comparatively over time. So from left to right, we have bars for each subsequent spring. Spring 2015 in blue, 2016 next to it, and then 2017 and 2018. This is just ELA on your screen right now. You can see that all areas have shown improvement since the first testing in 2015. Grades 5, 8, 9, 10, and 11 were the highest they've been in 2018. Ninth grade ELA performance in percent passing has improved 24 percentage points since 2015. 11th grade is effectively unchanged since 2015. It's only 1% higher. But keeping in mind what Dr. Nance just said, the tests do change from year to year, and not every year. That some of the tests are a little bit harder and some are a little bit different.
Every once in a while, you find an anomaly, and you try to explain why something happened. And on this slide, the one that jumps out to me is grade 11 ELA last year, 2017. You can see that it's significantly lower, well, not significantly, but a few points lower than it was the year before and this year. And we noticed that last year, and we're concerned about it, and started making phone calls to Cindy and Mesa and people across the valley. Every district we talked to had a significant drop in ELA for that year. It was a change in test. The test changed. It was a change in, which standards students were asked to be showing mastery on. And so when we see something like that, we really do try to figure out, is it us or is it something we see across the board? So we were very happy to see that jump back up a little bit this year.
Yes.
You mentioned something about cut scores. And so these are the percentages of the individuals who showed passing, proficient to highly proficient.
Right.
So just for the public, can you talk a little bit about those cut scores? Because I know in the past when we had when we had Ames, because the students weren't meeting them, the state decided to go ahead and then the term used dummy down those cut scores so that it showed that our students were mastering at a higher level when actually they weren't. Is that also being done for Arizona Merits?
It has not. So the cut scores were set for each of the 4 performance levels: minimally proficient, partially proficient, proficient, and highly proficient in the summer of 2015 once the initial data was back. Those same cut scores have stayed the same since that time, so throughout the 4 years.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So let's look at math. This is percent passing changes over time in Scottsdale year over year. Again, we're seeing some good positive changes over time in terms of the percentage of students passing the test. The one place where it kind of stands out more than anywhere else is in grade 8, and I want to talk about grade 8 for a minute in math. In 2015, the first time we gave this test, every 8th grader in the state of Arizona took the test. Okay, so regardless of whether they were taking Algebra 1 or Geometry or Algebra 2, they took the 8th grade math test. In subsequent years, the rules changed about who we test, and we no longer test every 8th grader in our school district on the 8th grade math. Instead, they take the test of the course they're taking. So this data from 16, 17, and 18 reflects students that are testing on grade level, whereas the 2015 data includes students that were taking an advanced high school math at that point in time. So as we progress through my slides, you will see that the 8th grade results are a little bit lower because your advanced 8th graders aren't included in that grade 8 math total. You see some really great trends in the elementary levels. 3/4 of the Scottsdale students in 2018, 3rd graders, passed the AZ Merit Math, which is a great thing to see. You see the increases across the years from grades 3 through 6. Looking at taking a step back and just looking at the minimally proficient. On my previous slides, we wanted to see high numbers. Minimally proficient is the lowest level of performance on the AZ Merit test. On this slide, we want to see lower numbers. We want to see these numbers decreasing over time. What you're seeing up on the screen is in grades 3 through 5, we are seeing some really great trends in going down over the last 4 springs, especially in grade 5. And again, we're looking at just ELA right now. When you get into the 9th grade ELA, we've seen a percentage of nearly 10% decrease since 2015 in minimally proficient, from 34% in 2015 down to 23% in 2018. Our numbers are still pretty high in 10th and 11th grade ELA in terms of the number of students that are in the minimally proficient categories.
We maybe talk about high school a minute. One of the things we've been looking closely at is why are our high school scores not better than they are? And that's an important question to ask because there is a significant difference between what's happening with our AZ Merit scores at the elementary versus the upper grades. If you remember back when Ames first came into play, Ames was used as a graduation requirement, and Ames was also put out there that if you did well enough on your test, you could go to the state university tuition free. I had a daughter do that. Then they phased that out. They phased that incentive out for kids. And there's been a lot of discussion about how seriously do high school kids take the AZ Merit test. And so one of the things we wanted to try to do is to get a handle on that. And, you know, the best way we could think of to try to figure this out is to compare grades that kids receive in the course with their AZ Merit results. And we were able to do that. I'm going to give you, just send around a copy here of this. And if you'd allow me to explain it for a second, I think it does shed a little bit of light on what happens in high school. So the numbers that you see are students in the first semester and students in the second semester who received either an A or B in that course and failed the AZ Merit test. And those numbers are quite large when you look at that. For example, the ELA 11 test, in the first semester, we had 634 students in this district get an A or B in the class and fail the AZ Merit test.
Failed it.
They did not meet proficiency. It was either minimally or partially proficient. And so it's one of two things. Either we have massive grade inflation going on, which I don't think is the case, or they don't care when they take this test. Because if they can get an A or B in the class and the grading is appropriate and they're meeting the standards, they should be able to pass the AZ Merit test. The AZ Merit test it's actually a minimal level of proficiency. It's not even where we want them to be. And so you can look at these large numbers of students that don't do well on AZ Merit, but in class they do well. And while this is not a scientific indicator of anything, it was the best way we could look at our students and whether we believe they take this seriously at the high school level.
Was this an issue in your previous district as well?
Yes.
And to add to that, there are a handful of districts that put in place an incentive program. And I believe we talked about this at one time a year or so ago. And we started looking at the possibilities of, if you do well on AZ Merit, is there a way to enhance your grade in the course? Well, if you already have an A, certainly that's not going to make a difference. But those kids that had Bs, or even students that have Cs, Mesa was one of the districts that jumped in, and for last year, was it in place?
For the first time in
For the
spring.
first time last year, put these incentives in place and are able to calculate for all of the students that take the test. We had some preliminary discussions about that last spring. Dr. Johnson was involved in it with the high school principals. There were some positives and negatives to doing it. The positive is it might work. The negative side of it is this could be the last year of AZ Merit for high school kids anyway. The state's looking at whether they give us the they already gave us the option, but require us to choose from ACT or SAT or one or the other, which I think would be great because it would be much more of an incentive for kids. So this is maybe the last year. We don't know that for sure. Also, we didn't want to jump out there not knowing what the results were from another district that may have tried it first. And so we're anxious to hear from the 2 or 3 districts that I know of that put this into place. A lot of districts talked about it, most decided they were not going to.
The
do it.
incentive.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you brought that up, because this is a perfect segue. Regardless of whether the state requires us to use an ACT or an SAT, I don't know if PSAT is one of the tests as well. There's a lot of chatter about that right now, and one of the questions I had was, could a district require those tests for high school but still stick with AZ merit for the younger grades?
Oh, yeah, I'm on Cindy.
This year, yes, for
So,
yes.
I would be interested in, because I'm not a proponent of testing kids just to test them. And we all know they're over-tested. I would be a proponent of having a work study or a conversation later to explore board interest and hear from staff the pros and cons of moving forward with ACT, SAT, PSAT, whatever other ones are out there, regardless of what the state does. They've already allowed us to do it if we want to. So let's have the conversation rather than be pushed into it.
So let us gather the information from the districts that have done it, and put that together so that you have a more informed.
But are there any that have done it that we,
The only one that talked about it that I know of was Chandler, and I don't know what that final decision was.
I think Tucson is moving
Tucson,
forward
yeah.
this year
Yeah.
with
Okay.
it for the first time, but this is the first year. And then next year, in 2019, 2020, all schools will have a choice of doing, not just high school, it'll be also elementary and middle school.
We had this discussion late in the game, it was probably May when this started coming out, and you had to decide by July 1st whether
yeah,
you were going to
and
do it
I'm
or
not,
not.
I'll
It's
be
kind of
honest, I mean, in this,
last minute.
even if I were going to be on the board January 1 for 4 more years, I'm not interested in waiting to see how it works for other districts. Every district's unique. We talk about that all the time. They have different leadership, they have different populations. I would be more interested in having a conversation with this administration, this board, to say, do we want to do that here in Scottsdale? And for us, I don't know when the cutoff is for us to make that decision to implement it at the end of the year.
We cannot do it for this year.
So it would be, so when's the cutoff for us to make the decision?
It
to
was
implement?
July 1st.
All right, so I think it's personally, I'm a big fan of that.
We are too, and I think, a couple of things that we ended up tossing around, and Cindy had the same conversation in the Mesa School District. Number one, the state doesn't know what to do with that data. They don't know yet and have not formulated how that would be put into an A to F label, or they have no idea how they would use it. And maybe it doesn't matter, but they don't know what they're doing on that yet. A number of, and we're not in this category, a number of districts weren't going to do it because they have to pay for it for every kid. We already pay for it for every kid. So
Right.
we're already
We're already doing it.
ahead with that. But we will, yeah, absolutely. I think you're going to see a whole lot of districts move in that direction, even if the state continues with AZ merit, let you have that choice. Right now, the choice is high school only, but the state is also looking in the future at options for the other grades as well. I don't know what those are yet.
Okay, thank you. Sorry to derail, but he opened
No,
the door.
no,
so-
I appreciate it, because I was going to ask
Good
about that.
direction.
Can I?
Board Member Kravitz.
So we pay for our 11th graders to take, is it the ACT?
Yes.
Okay, so we're already paying for that. So if we can knock another test
Oh,
off
absolutely.
off of our plate,
Absolutely.
I'm all in favor of it.
And one
because
that's
it
more
takes up
relevant.
so much, more relevant
More
to real
incentive for
world
kids.
More incentive.
stuff. We have,
Just a little more teeth.
if we can take AZ merit off the table, it takes up so much of our class time.
We totally agree.
Yep.
Like yesterday, I'd be in favor of it.
Okay.
No, I have a
Oh,
couple
sorry.
questions
Board Member Beck.
since we brought it up. And I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit in going back my experience with the district. My experience had been that in middle school is when we saw the decline. So we started seeing a decline, especially in the highly proficient area for math and English.
for our schools, so that in 5th grade, we kind of peaked, 6th grade came down a little bit, might saw a little flat line. By 7th, by 8th grade, we were much lower.
We have that
So
on
it
the next
really
couple.
starts in middle school, which I then had made the assumption, that's part of why, it draws into high school, and our high school grades are not as high as they are. So you had mentioned that it had just been high school. I would like to really look at the statistics and see, is it really starting in middle school? Because that was my experience.
Grades, you're saying the correlation between, I'm not sure what you're
The
saying.
correlation, so what starts to happen is either the kids are not mastering the material and doing well on their tests in 7th and 8th grade, therefore they aren't getting that foundation to keep them at a positive or an improving trajectory. They just continually, they're flatter, they'll go down because the material gets harder in high school if they're not prepared in middle school. And that's what those numbers had shown me in the past, and what I
And
think
I
that they
also
still
think
do.
the incentive for kids isn't there, and the older students get, the less apt they are to, put great effort into it if they don't see any meaning to it.
Right. And then that brings up my other idea. So our students took the ACT in 11th grade, correct? And the PSAT in 10th grade?
Yes.
So I would love to see these
Yeah.
numbers compared to the ACT and the PSAT.
That's
And
a great
therefore,
idea.
especially with those, because it will start to show if we do have grade inflation. If they did not do well on the ACT or the PSAT, it's not just the Arizona merits, and it's not just an incentive. It's that they may not really understand the material from a national standpoint. And I think that would be really valuable
The other
to
thing
have,
to
and
keep-
help in the
The
conversation.
other thing to
that we
keep
have.
in mind, though, and we've had this discussion as well, AZ merit matches Arizona standards.
Correct.
ACT does not.
Correct. No, it's aptitude. It's going to be showing if we are doing our job so that the kids are prepared for national, on a national level.
Right, and we,
And if-
yeah, no,
so it will-
I agree with you. We can look at that. We
Yeah,
can look at
that would be
some
really
kind of
interesting.
correlation.
Okay, Member Kirby.
One more question on this slide. Can you address move on when reading?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Move on when reading is a 3rd grade retention policy where kids can be identified to be retained before moving on to 4th grade based on their reading scores. Students are identified based on a reading score that we don't see on the AZ merit, but we are given the data back in terms of which students were identified. This year in Scottsdale, in spring of 2018, a total of 12 students were identified initially. Of those 12 students, 4 were exempt because of their English language learner status, 4 were exempt because of their special education status, and 1 had moved before we got to the point of addressing it. So we had 3 students that were subject to retention going into 4th grade, starting now. Those 3 students were given summer school programs at Navajo, and then they were given a standardized test that we administered through School City, and those 3 passed on to get into 4th grade. So it's a very small number. It's not every minimally proficient student, obviously. It's a very, very small number. Does that answer?
It does. Thank you.
Okay, so let's look at math minimally proficient over time. These numbers, again, have really decreased pretty much across the board. You're right, they are lower in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th grades. You do see a jump again in 6th, but again, we're down from starting in 2015. Still a little bit of concern, which we talked about with the people taking it seriously in the high schools, is that 1 in 4 students is showing up as minimally proficient, roughly, on the math in Algebra 1, Geometry, and Algebra 2. All right, so we went through minimally proficient, which again is the lowest category. Let's look at our highly proficient changes over time. This is the highest category, so we want to again see these numbers go up. I have to mention ELA again is going, this is all ELA, this is the data. Our elementary 3, 4, 5 are showing really 1 in 3 students in 2018 was highly proficient, so that's the top performers. Grade 6 is it's a steady upward trend, same with 8 and 9. Again, 10th grade showed the highest percentage of ELA highly proficient in in 2018, and comparing it to the data we showed on the previous slide with the minimally proficient, we have students that are either taking it very seriously and going for that highly proficient, or they're falling into that minimally proficient category in some cases. So again, this is our data over time.
And this is the point I'm making, that has been a real concern, and I really want to, when we talk about a review, talk about how the district is going to address that big drop in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. That would be.
One of the questions, I don't know if Cindy and I kind of talked about it yesterday, I think, and I don't know if you've got any comments yet, or we need to come back at a later time, was to look at the performance of 6th graders who are in a 6, 7, 8 setting versus a K-8 setting. Does the transition from an elementary campus to a middle school campus make any difference versus a K-8 where they're all on one campus and they haven't transitioned? I don't know if you've had a chance to look at that, but we will.
I just know from my child's elementary to the child's middle school, it was a huge drop, and it was something that I thought, if you're a highly proficient kid and you're looking at those numbers and you're going into middle school, it makes it hard to choose.
I feel like it's Groundhog Day, I'm sorry, because
Yeah.
this was the same conversation we had 8 years ago when I started, and then we get into, and that's why all the students would leave in
We gotta-
4th grade,
we
and so
gotta
you'd see the
figure it out.
enrollment drop, because it's just.
We got to figure it out.
But
The numbers
and if I
are there.
can add on to that, in my career, I've seen this drop in middle school on the Iowa Test of Basic Skills, on the California Achievement Test that we gave next, in ASAP, Ames, and AZ Merit. Whatever the test has been, there is a drop in the 7th and 8th grade, at least. There's always been in performance. And I've talked to employees of the testing divisions of the major companies that produce these tests, and they say, it's got to be about instruction. So, okay, I believe that there has to be part of this, but how can it be regardless of the test and regardless of the era? The same thing has been.
Because the format's the same. That's my opinion. It's that middle school no man's land versus K-8. It's the K-8 debate, right? That's my opinion.
Okay, that's why you want to look at that area.
Let's look at it.
Yeah,
Prove it.
we'll look at,
Let's see if it's wrong. I mean,
Yeah.
let's start figuring, that's how we're
Let's
going to
figure it
figure it
out.
out,
We need
is we
to.
just eliminate by looking at data.
Yeah, we need to, I think, look at other districts who have K-8s and 6-8s and that kind of thing, and get beyond what just Scottsdale does, but let's look at it as an overall concept. And I think once we get data available to us from other districts, we can do that. We don't have other districts to do right now.
I'm not following why other districts
Because
is
we only
necessary.
have 4 K-8 schools.
Okay,
You've
we've
got
got
to
4.
look at it, I think, a larger sampling.
The only reason I'm challenging you, though, is with other districts, you're introducing a whole host of new variables. That might be that district has some middle school programs that are very strong and have.
But if they show the same decline we have, is it the same problem we have?
But we can look at their trends, and then if we see outliers, then we want to go look and say, what is it? Why are you different than us? What is it? What are the programs you have? What is the configuration you have? What is the teacher training that you do?
Okay.
Once we look at.
I mean, this, Turner.
Looking at our math highly proficient change over time, again, we're showing pretty much an increase in almost every grade over the last four springs. I really want to point out the 3rd grade highly proficient number is 43%. We had a 3rd grade math pass rate of 75%. Of those students, 43% of them were in the highly proficient category. That was extremely strong. When I compiled this data, the only data available comparatively was the state data, and the state number for highly proficient in 3rd grade math was 22%. So ours are much stronger than the state overall. We're really leading the pack in terms of highly proficient in math. Okay, so I just wanted to give you guys a little bit of a different viewpoint on the data. This isn't different data than you've already seen, but this is a way of presenting it in a different way. What I did was I took the free and reduced lunch percentages per school from a report that was generated in April, and then I mapped it to the percent passing by school on this screen. So let me explain what you're seeing. On the vertical axis, you're seeing the percent passing rate for ELA third grade, starting from 0 up to 100. On the horizontal axis, you're seeing the percent of low-income students at that school, starting from 100 to 0. And by looking at it this way, you can compare schools with relatively similar demographics in terms of free and reduced lunch and see which ones are performing percent passing better or lower than others. The yellow line that you see in the middle is the line of best fit, or the trend line. So schools that are above the yellow line are doing a little bit better than the schools that are below the yellow line. And this is just a sample of third grade ELA. These charts do exist for all the subjects and grade levels in Scottsdale right now, but I just chose a few just to give you an example of what this data looks like. Yes?
So what's your conclusion from this?
To me, I would want to learn from my counterparts that have similar demographic information as I do and say, okay, what's going on at Yavapai, for instance, that's a little bit different than Tonalea in terms of third grade ELA, because their percent passing was higher last year. I'd be curious to dig into the data at Navajo and see what they're doing differently than the other counterparts that are in their similar free and reduced lunch percentages.
How can we replicate what the schools that are above the line with the schools that are below the line
Absolutely.
are finding out what they're doing? And we can do that internal search and investigation as well.
And then what?
And then adjust instruction or training or
Share best practices across campuses?
share best practices.
Maybe?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It's to take out the idea that I have a certain demographic profile and therefore my students won't do as well in terms of free and reduced lunch. I can say, no, actually, these students are doing better. Looking at Navajo, for instance, their percent passing, I don't have it exactly on third grade ELA, let me look, was at 67.8%. Well, they're comparative to schools with a lot less free and reduced lunch students. So what's going on at Navajo that we can learn from? Obviously, there's something to celebrate in third grade ELA. Again, this is third grade math. This is just another perspective, same idea of looking at math as opposed to ELA, same presentation of the information. I also presented you with 7th grade math, so you could get an idea of what it looks like with the middle school data. Fewer schools, but there's still some information to be gathered from there.
Well, this shows you the difference between your K-8s and your, well, middle schools aren't, no, wait.
It's all of them. It
is
does
all of
include them,
So you
right.
can see the difference there.
In 7th grade, yes.
Seventh grade.
Mhm. And again, these charts do exist for all the other grade levels. This was just a sample pulled out to give you an idea. And finally, just to show you a high school comparison, again, we have fewer high schools, but you can see in this comparison, I think the data shows that, Saguaro is way above the line in terms of percent passing in their area. And this is 9th grade ELA, I didn't point that out. Now that you've seen the data, let's talk a bit about what's happening with these results and future plans for the usage. Schools and teachers have access to their AZ Merit data. They've been able to access it through the AZ Merit portal, which is where we give this test basically, since late May, early June. Parents are receiving their own individual students' reports on a paper copy. Those are being sent out this week, next week at all schools around the district. And teachers also can see how their prior students did, so their students from last spring did, as well as the performance of their current students through School City. All the scores are uploaded into that system and they can pull up their rosters.
So if I can
Yes.
interject, and both of those things are important because it's important for the teachers to see how last year's students do to judge their own instructional practices. If there's a trend in the scores, certain standards are not being met more consistently across the way, then they can adjust their instructional strategies, as well as then looking at their current students to see where the gaps are and design their lessons accordingly for that. So there's two purposes in having teachers see their prior students as well as their current students.
Rebecca?
And is that work all done during the summer so that they start the year, making decisions based upon that data?
The
So
loading
on
of the data into the system, is that?
Well, no, the teachers have all this information, so on August 7th, they were ready to say, hey, okay, I recognize last year
Yeah.
that I didn't cover these standards, I want to make sure I do it this year, and what else they're going to glean from that. That work was all during the summer.
It was available.
It was
on the
available,
first
but
day
I
of
will tell
school.
you, in my school visits on the first day, in talking to the principals, they all had information for me on test data and what they were doing. My question to each one was, what is your instructional focus for this year going to be? And so, well, based on our scores, our teachers went through this, we're doing this, we're doing that. As well as a lot of references to the training that took place the week a week and a half before at Chaparral with some of the people we had, especially the Sue Sakowitz or whatever her name was, presented on literacy. So they had been training, and probably a lot of it wasn't done all summer long, but done in preparation for there was a lot of discussion.
Well, I guess part of my question was because I know that there's been delays in getting that information and that data. So I was curious as to, did they do that work during the summer so that they're ready when school starts? Or is it really during this month that they're putting together that data, and in September they're going to start with the new ideas or whatever the conclusions that they've come to, that you mentioned, changing your instructional emphasis, or, whatever they're doing, the best practices that you might get from other schools, so that those can be implemented.
It's an ongoing process. The data was all available when they came back to work during the 3 days they had prior to school starting. I know that I would probably say every principal had spent time talking about the data, talking about vision of the schools, Dr. Greencard mentioned, and moving forward. But it's something that will continue to happen in their professional learning communities, in their staff meetings and trainings that happen at each school site throughout the year. So it's underway, absolutely.
My guess is not all summer as much as the last couple of weeks,
Okay.
but teachers are anxious to see that data when they get to school.
Board Member Kravitz?
So we share this with the teachers. What are we doing to reach out to parents? To help them understand why this is important, why it's important that their children be in school every day, to help them become better students. I get it, we want everybody to pass the test and do well on the test. Some people don't give a rip about the test. There are some parents who inculcate the fear of God in their kids if they don't take the test seriously. There are others who are like, well, it's just a test and I really don't care. I don't want my kid taking this test. I don't think it's important. But I think it's important, you were talking about, well, what's different within what's going on in these schools. I'd like to look at attendance of the students. Because if you're not in school,
Absolutely.
you're not going to do well. It's just, showing literacy in math and in ELA, I think it shows in the test, unfortunately. We live in a world where people are tested. It's just facts, whether we like it or not.
I would like to see next spring a concerted effort by Dr. Nance's department and by Dr. Bachna to help principals understand and have the principals delivering that message and have the strategy to help principals deliver this message to the parents early on.
Right, well, I would like,
Early on.
when we have
Sorry.
back to school night, I would, and I know that our teachers do it and our principals do it, but we need to continue to just reinforce and reiterate day after day, your child needs to be in school. The Phoenix Open is coming, it doesn't matter. That's a big day for absences. Your child needs to be in school. Every day matters.
Board Kirby, did you have a?
Yeah,
you had your hand raised first?
so back to the data. Dr. Creekard, are you supporting the data rooms that we built last year? And you're encouraging?
Yeah, I've seen tremendous attitudinal results by teachers being able to go to rooms where data is kept visually and take a look and say, oh, I didn't know that kid was such and such or did this or that. And Dr. Hagegat can, especially at the.
Yes, I've had conversations with all 19 principals, and one of my topics are the data rooms. I'm huge into data rooms. I've been using them for years at both of those schools that I tended to. And so that's something that not only are they going to get encouraged, but they're going to get support to lose some of those thoughts that may be attached to, are they valuable? How can we utilize them? How do we take away that fear? So that's something that's a priority for us, because if you don't know what you're teaching, then how do you move them forward?
Right, thank you.
I just want to put an emphasis on the question, because it was going to be my next one. This board has been very committed the last couple of years of bringing those data dialogues down to our campuses, happening with our teachers, happening with our principals. We've taken a lot of steps to make sure that our staff has the time and resources to have those conversations, and to not see that continuing and even getting stronger with this new data, yeah, it would just be very disappointing, so.
Over time, you'll see the differences. We've been able to do this, taking a school from an underperforming status by the state through the RTI model and the data rooms to really sustain at a proficient level. So it's something that I take joy and pride in pushing.
Board Member Becker.
2 points. One was mentioned, and I realized that you weren't here in the spring. So if I'm not mistaken, part of what our high schools did is just what we talked about. Our high school principals really gave a push for making this Arizona Merits matter. And they had banners, and they talked to the kids, and they talked to the parents, and they did do a push. So the results weren't in this first year, but that would be worth going back and evaluating. Was it worthwhile, or do we just need to do something different with, that wasn't enough? Or was it just, some did care, but it wasn't enough to move those numbers? Because you can look at the high schools that maybe, after talking to the principals, did a couple of special things that they think maybe made a difference. They might know because they can go to that individual teacher. Something else that Board Member Kravitz mentioned that really didn't get answered, and you asked the question, which was, and I'd like an answer, how are we communicating to the parents once we get these numbers? Because this may be that one piece, is you can't, if the parent doesn't see the value in the Arizona Merits, it's really hard at the dinner table to motivate their child. Even though they can say it, they'll know that it's empty. And part of that is, do we ever talk to the parents afterwards? And it's unfortunate timing, it really is. I wish we could take Arizona Merits, have it come out in May so that those discussions could be more one-on-one. It comes out in the middle of the summer, so you pull it up on a portal, and there it is, and you never hear it again, because your child's moved on. So that's something to think about. If this needs to be important to the parents as well, to be able to reinforce that and support their child, maybe we need to think about how do we start communicating what that number, those two numbers mean that these kids got. Do we do something where we give a little report card of every year showing from when they started at SUSD so that they can see how their child's doing and talk about it?
City for their own.
They can log in as their student. I don't, yeah.
So just, to answer your question, what you're asking, the information to parents has to be at a campus level. It has to be done at the local level by the principal, the counselors, the teachers, everyone involved. And I know Dr. Hagegat and Dr. Sackos are already working with principals about how to make this happen. Our job is to support them and provide resources and information and everything we can do. When they ask, we'll be there. We'll make sure they have what they need. But the actual presentation to parents of what's important And it may vary a little bit from school to school in terms of what that looks like, but that's something, and I would encourage that absolutely as well, that we work very closely with our administrators to make that happen.
And I would add that Dr. Bachner, I know, is going out to schools, rolling out to schools, to help them with the analysis of what this means.
Along with my colleagues, we're all going to work together with the principals and go out together and have these discussions, absolutely.
Right.
Well, but maybe one of the things we can think of is if this test continues, or at least, third grade through 8, is we do a little Arizona Merits Report Card. So at least there's a touch to the parents that can sit down with the child and say, look, this is how you're doing each year. Something creative.
But I'm going to say, I agree that, I agree with Dr. Nance that it is more of a culture thing on a campus. As far as, us sending out information to a parent, they're still not going to know how to process it.
I'm saying it should be being done, but
I have
that's why
spoken with parents who are, their student is in a culture where they go literally to, that day, AZ Merit, can't wait to show the state how smart they are, as was heard in some carpools. Can't wait to show that that's a culture on a campus that you build, and I think it's an excellent thing for this district to head towards.
Here's a simple question, and this is rhetorical, you don't have to answer, I don't expect you to know it, but of our elementary campuses, how many of them are presenting their school's AZ Merit results at their back-to-school night? You probably don't know.
Well, no, but I'll look for that
And
information.
that's a starting
'cause it's
point,
key.
because that's key, because
It's a culture, yeah.
when my kids were in elementary, that was, you just expect, and then what happens is you went, okay, so how is my kid holding up their end of their school? Like, are they pulling down the grade, are they pulling up the grade? And that begins to establish that culture, but if the information isn't shared.
And I have seen it in newsletters as a parent of the district with Ames and AC Merit, where they share the overall data and they put it as part of their newsletter, and not just in a little corner, but it's been shared. But I do like that personal touch of, if this is really one of the elements that's very important for us, how are we putting it out there? What is it that we are expecting and giving support so that it does happen? And then on another personal note, I have friends that have children within our district, and so they can't wait to call me each summer, even before I was employed here, to let me know how great their students are doing, and that's part of the school culture.
Right.
Yeah.
But it does come from the district, and no disrespect here, it comes from the district to say.
Well, we set
to
the
your-
expectation.
The expectations
Absolutely.
for those schools, but also the follow-up. So what if it's not being done, then we need to provide the guidance to show maybe what some of the other schools are doing, and maybe there's 2 or 3 different ways, so that they could say, hey, something I'd be interested in doing. So
we're belaboring
it
this,
does
but
come
this is
from us.
important, because as you're talking, remember how surprised the Coronado community was, the Tonalea community was, when they first learned what their AZ Merit results had been for the past decade.
Yeah.
Just recently, they learned that.
Yeah.
Remember their shock?
And
They-
I would agree. I mean, we've been working past 2 years now in changing that culture. And yeah, we've hit some big walls as we
Well, and there's
change
been
that
shock
culture.
at other
There's been
campuses,
shock at
too,
other campuses. The
where
more
they
we
think
look at this
everything's
data, it makes a lot of
hunky-dory,
people
and then they're
uncomfortable.
like-
But to
I'm
your
not
point,
disagreeing
board
with
member
you.
Beckham.
No, I know you're not.
I think we're all
just-
agreeing, this is important. It
I
has
guess
to
my point
continue
is, it's
as
the
we move on.
responsibility of this administration and this board, because it's the direction that we've given, that we follow through and we make sure it's happening.
Right.
That's all I'm
That's-
asking
I
for, and I
think
want to
we're
be able
all-
to see that, not
Let
just.
me be clear about this. We don't, as a group, I'm comfortable, we don't put out expectations without the follow-up and the accountability measure that follows. That is clearly my expectation of them, and the people that we have hired here have that expectation. They understand that. You put out expectations, then you hold people accountable for it, you follow up to find out. You don't just throw them out there and let it go.
So do you agree that AZ Merit results at a campus level should be shared at the back-to-school night?
Absolutely.
So can we, as a follow-up, back to the board, give us a recap?
And I'm not texting, I'm taking notes. Let's make it clear.
That'd be a good place to start.
For all levels.
Yeah, all schools.
Sure. So we've talked about, we're going to be having principal conversations and also, again, professional development. What can we learn from this and other data sources that help us improve instructional practices? And ultimately, we'll hopefully see some increase in these scores as well. I'm going to wrap up with an accountability update about the 2017-18 A through F letter grades. Right now, the preliminary letter grades are projected to be released in late September. I'm thinking they're going to make that deadline right now. After their preliminary release, what happens is there's a few weeks for an appeal period where schools get to review their data, and I help them review their data, and then discuss any discrepancies with the state, and then the grades are finalized most likely at the end of October. Changes made to the 17-18 letter grade model should help in certain capacities our schools. One of the big ones was they're awarding more credit for students that are proficient or highly proficient and have average student growth, which was something they didn't do in the previous school year. They've lowered the number of students you need per category to earn points. What that means is before you needed to have 20 students in a particular demographic or ELL students to earn credit for that group's growth or change, and now it's only 10 students. So schools with smaller populations of those groups have more access to get more points and possibly earn a higher letter grade. They're adding a bonus point for science proficiency, and I bring up the 95% student tested requirement. I know you probably have heard that was instilled in the past. It's existed since Ames, but they haven't been enforcing it until 17-18 now with AZ Merit. So this will be the first year we actually do need to be careful about the 95% of students getting tested on each campus. I've looked at the numbers of students we tested in 16-17 versus 17-18, and the schools I'd most worry about would be the high schools, and I can see there's an increase in the number of students we tested from spring 17 to spring 18 in the high school courses, so that's a good sign. In terms of the high schools alone, they have part of their letter grade is based on what's called a College and Career Readiness Index. It's 20% of their letter grade. There's a variety of factors that go into that index. It's all self-report that we gather the data working with the high schools over May, June, July. We reported that data back in July. We saw an increase on every school's spreadsheet of information of points earned in this school year as opposed to the 16-17 school year, which was the first year that spreadsheet was in existence and we were reporting that data. So across the board, every school earned a few more points, which is a good sign. And some of the things that are collected are listed on the screen. Yeah, Member Kirby?
Okay, so last year, the principals each presented throughout the year to the board their goals for improvement in ELA, math, and they had, they each had their different goals. I would like to see a recap of how the schools did against the goals they set for themselves. Back to the follow through and follow up. Let's.
Yeah, that's something it is fairly individual from school
It was
to school,
totally individual.
So it's really gonna be up to each school to put that together, looking at the goals they presented, the goals they worked on all year. And the
Well, let
progress
me
they made.
rephrase to make it a little simpler, because I'm not looking for a fluff presentation. I'm more focused on the achievement metrics, the academic achievement. I'm not looking
Right,
at the
no,
communication.
no, absolutely.
I trust that they're doing.
And they all had an academic goal.
They all had an academic goal,
Yeah.
so that's the one I'm most interested in.
Yeah.
Appreciate that, because
Yeah.
what's the point of making a presentation and having a goal if we don't see if they're attaining it?
Yeah. Want to see CIPs if we don't.
CIPs.
Yes,
I just could
CIPs.
not think of.
And I know
Continue.
Dr.
Right.
Hagegat and Dr. Sackos, I know you're working with principals now on this coming year's CIPs, and they may look a little bit different than the past.
Right.
Got it.
Any additional
That's it.
comments? Any questions? All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Sue.
Good discussion.
Yes,
Good.
yes,
Welcome.
yes. Thank you all for your continued dedication to driving this data dialogue forward. It's been a long road to get here. Okay, so that brings us to our action items. We are tabling action item 6A, possible approval of interim superintendent or superintendent search firm, and we'll be seeing action items like that on Tuesday, our regular meeting. We'll move directly to action item 6B, possible approval of revisions to governing board policy BDG and general counsel position description and general counsel evaluation instruments.
Yeah. It took us how long? Since April.
Madam President, members of the board, I have on action for today possible approval of revisions to policy BDG, which is your school attorney policy, along with revisions to the position description for general counsel and the evaluation instruments for the position as well. I'll start with the policy. As you'll recall, we've had some discussion about this policy recently toward the end of last school year, in which the board chose to have this position report directly to the board, and we had some discussion about how evaluation would work for this position. The revisions include revising it from the board president and superintendent evaluating the position to the governing board as a whole evaluating the performance. In that, through discussion with the board, we discussed having the evaluation process including an informal mid-year review as well as a year-end review. I'll talk about exhibits in a second. The evaluation process has a goal of being finished by June of each year with a little bit of leeway in there if we need to agree to a different timeline. We talked about an evaluation instrument to include a number of annual operational goals that would align with the district's strategic plan and annual goals, and having the board consult with the superintendent and general counsel to develop those goals and to establish tools to measure those objectives so that there's a discussion built in as to what the board will expect to see to show that those goals were achieved or not achieved. The review, much like the review of the other position that reports directly to you, the superintendent, review will be conducted in executive session, same kind of process. And then finally, a note that the general counsel can submit a response to the evaluation. One technicality on this is you had 2 reads of policy BDG before. This would technically be a first read. So you can choose to waive the second read and adopt this revised policy along with the exhibits and the evaluation instruments all today, or we can just put it on the 14th for a second read and you can adopt it on consent, or if you want to have discussion about it on action next week. I will go ahead and talk about the evaluation instruments. The evaluation instruments will be, the evaluation, actually, let me start with the position description. So in going through the position description, we just kind of cleaned up some things that aren't really happening currently. So that was a good discussion back and forth about what should be in here. So we just kind of looked at, for instance, there was a note in here about acting as the compliance officer. I went through our policies and I actually had a discussion with Cabinet about everywhere in our policy that says compliance officer. That's not always me. And so we're having that discussion as a Cabinet, what position makes sense to be the, for instance, the equal educational opportunities compliance officer and things like that. So, And then, so just going through the reality of what the job is today, added in things like reviewing experience ratings with insurance providers, review of contracts, which has always been there in some form, but just clean that up a little bit with the description. And then the evaluation instruments track this description. So I'll pull that up. And we have 3 forms for the evaluation instruments. The self-evaluation for the general counsel to fill out, a superintendent version for the superintendent, and then a version for the board to fill out. The self-evaluation is the only one that's a little bit different. Oh, no, I think that's the governing board one. No, I was right. It is the self-evaluation that's a little bit different, sorry. So again, all the evaluation instruments, which again will be exhibits to the policy, so anybody can go online and look it up once we get it uploaded. Generally tracks, is the person, in this case me today, meeting what the description requires. And what we added to the draft evaluation instrument is a place to put those annual goals after discussion with the board, as well as what did we decide on as the measurement of that performance. So that's in the self-evaluation, the only difference there. Otherwise, the superintendent's version and the governing board's version look exactly the same. So with that, I'll take any questions, comments, and if you need more information about waiving that second read, if you want to do that, or give me direction about that.
Thank you for the presentation, Ms. Marshall. I guess I'd be a fan of putting it on consent,
Okay.
just so the public has an opportunity.
Sure.
This would be part of the agenda posting with all the backup documents,
Right.
correct?
Yes.
So they would have an opportunity to look at it, review it, and if they wanted to make public comment on it, to
Great.
alert us to something, then we have that level of transparency.
Great.
But we don't need I don't need another presentation, so.
Oh, no.
Okay.
Presentation.
I would completely agree with that, board members.
Great.
And just as a caveat, if there is any major amendment, we can pull it from consent,
Yeah.
make the amendments, and then.
Yes, you can do
Yeah.
that too.
Vote.
Okay.
Just so
I
the
will-
public
It's
knows
true.
that we're not
Right.
just sticking it out there to be
Okay.
rubber stamped. Absolutely.
All right, I will plan to
Right.
bring it back on consent on Tuesday, the 14th.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All
And thank you
right.
for all your work on that.
Thank you for all your work on that, yes. Okay, no further questions or comments? Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Moved.
Board Member Kirby, a second?
Second.
Thank you, Board Member Kravitz, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, motion passes 4-0. Everyone have a great weekend.